Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42.
Amber, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me here.
Amber Greves is our guest. Amber is a member of the Minnetonka City Council, having been appointed to that position in February of this year. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, you're running for re-election this coming fall for a 4-year term. Is that correct?
I am.
Tell me a little bit about your background, Amber.
Sure, you bet. Well, first and foremost, I'm a mom of 3 kids. That usually takes the first place there when I describe who I am. But I'm also a speech pathologist. I work part-time in the Minnetonka School District and also occasionally through North Memorial Medical Center in their intensive aphasia program. So I work with people who've had strokes and who have communication difficulties as a result of that.
Now, I was on your website, so I see that you've got a number of priorities that you'd like to accomplish during your term or terms on the City Council, including diversity in housing and preservation of environment. And I'm not meaning to minimize any of those, but I'd like to focus, if I might, on the ordinance that's been adopted out in Minnetonka that's got a fair amount of publicity. In fact, I think you were interviewed on television about that, if I'm not mistaken. And that is the social host ordinance, which was, as I understand it, adopted in mid-May of this year.
Specifically, our ordinance states that it's unlawful for a person to host or to allow a gathering on any premises, whether it's property they own or lease or otherwise control, if they know that alcohol or alcoholic beverages are present, if they know that underage youth will be present or likely to be present, and if a person fails to take reasonable steps to prevent the possession or consumption of alcohol or alcoholic beverages by a minor, and then if an underage person actually consumes alcohol.
What was the impetus for the adoption of the ordinance in Minnetonka?
Well, Minnetonka works closely with a couple organizations, a coalition called the Tonka Cares Coalition, which is part of the Minnetonka School District, and also a coalition called One Voice through the Hopkins Community Schools. And so those organizations have sort of brought community leaders together. In fact, they hosted a forum back in January that brought together members from some of those other cities.
No, that was before you were on the council.
It was before, but right before. So I actually attended that forum just out of my own interest. They had this forum with some of the other cities that already had experience with the social host ordinance. And at that forum, they sort of created a dialogue among all sorts of community leaders, police chiefs, to really educate us and bring attention to social host initiatives. Through that, we got a lot of data as to what's happening in Minnetonka. And what we know from surveys that have occurred, such at Minnetonka High School, is that about 33% of youth at Minnetonka High School consume alcohol at some point during high school.
Youth, you mean under 21?
In high school age,
high school.
even.
Okay.
From grades 9 to 12.
Okay.
There's a big jump in alcohol use from grades 9 to 10. That data also showed that 55% of 12th graders consumed alcohol at Minnetonka High School. And what we also learned from some of those surveys that Tonka Cares coordinated is that most underage drinkers are most likely to get alcohol, not from their parents, but from other young adults. People they know, and they are more likely to be consuming it in homes now, in smaller venues than they are at larger parties. So that data sort of helped us gather our thoughts as to why a social host initiative might be needed in our community. But we did introduce the ordinance early on in May, and we offered up a public hearing at that meeting. We did get some feedback, but in the interim between when we introduced the ordinance and when we actually passed the ordinance on May 18th, there was quite a bit of media coverage. Tonka Cares did some education in conjunction with the city. Some of the media coverage wasn't so great, but I think we cleared up some of the misconceptions about what a social host ordinance is.
What's the position of the Minnetonka City Police? Do they think this is an ordinance that should have been adopted, and are they actively attempting to enforce it?
I know our police chief feels it's a very valuable tool to have in the toolbox. It closes a loophole in state law. But I don't think it's his belief that it will be used very widely. I think it'll probably be used several times a year if needed. It could be more, but I think there's going to be an education piece there with our police officers and making sure that all information is there, all evidence is there before a citation is issued.
I understand that there's been some criticism, including the fact that perhaps this type of ordinance would be best adopted in a uniform state statute. What do you think about that?
I think that would be the ideal scenario, but it's kind of one of those situations too where it's not likely to happen anytime soon at the state level. You know, the earliest city that adopted this was in 2007, and that was Chaska. I do know that it has really shown itself to be a deterrent, and I think at least with the momentum that has picked up with cities, a number of cities passing this, my hope is that there will be a broad enough network that will eventually cover a good portion of the state.